There's something gut-level unsettling about seeing your garage wide open when you know you locked it tight, especially when your '67 Mustang, still tagged with federal evidence labels hanging from the mirror, is nowhere in sight. Moments later, HOA Karen comes rolling by in my car, grinning like Cruella de Vil at a Dalmatian yard sale. What she didn't realize, that car was part of an active DEA sting, and she'd just committed grand theft, straight from federal custody. And no, this isn't some action movie. This is real life when a Karen-fueled fake HOI decides to play militia in the wrong suburb. Freeze frame. Yep, that's me. The guy whose private well Karen tapped into so she could illegally water her flower beds. What did I do? I flushed her system with sewage. And buddy, that was just the start. You're probably wondering how this suburban Cold War kicked off. Truth is, I was just trying to keep to myself. I'd inherited my late uncle's old place after he got swept up in some multi-agency sting. News I didn't even get until after his funeral, when 2 DEA agents showed up to tell me I was now the proud owner of a property laced with frozen assets. Turns out Uncle Randy had a thing for partying and smuggling controlled substances across state lines. He also had a thing for classic cars, specifically a deep cherry red 1967 Mustang Fastback. The car was a beauty, untouched, pristine, and completely off-limits. I was under strict instruction: don't sell it, don't drive it, don't even turn it on. The car was under surveillance. I could store it in the garage, but I wasn't allowed to touch it. Still, it looked too good just sitting there. And that, apparently, was all it took to get under Karen's skin. See, I hadn't realized I'd moved into what basically amounted to a suburban version of the Hunger Games. My street had something called a Heritage Neighborhood Committee. Sounds innocent, like some folks quilting and baking pies, until you realize it was just a rebranded, disbanded HOA flexing old rules with a fresh chip on its shoulder. Leading the charge was Karen Witherspoon. President, judge, jury, self-appointed neighborhood marshal. She didn't like unapproved garages, unregistered cars, or people she didn't think fit in. And apparently, I hit the trifecta. At first, it was just paper notes. Folded sheets stuck to my door, shouting HOA Vehicle Code Section 12.4.2 violation in all caps, underlined 5 times, with no real authority to back them. I ignored them, figured she'd get bored and pick a new target. But Karen? Karen doesn't do bored. Karen escalates. One day, I found my mailbox crammed with warnings and a glossy, custom-printed pamphlet. Right on the front, a photo of my garage, Mustang's bumper barely peeking out. Inside, a tirade claiming unregistered cars invite crime and ruin property values. It read like a poorly sourced Reddit rant, with too many fonts and 3 random clip art pictures of broken windows. So I figured I'd talk to her, or at least try. One afternoon, I strolled over while she was trimming her hydrangeas like she was prepping for a horticultural war. I told her, calmly, Karen, that Mustang is federal evidence. I can't move it, sell it, or drive it. She didn't even glance up from her clippers. Then it shouldn't be in a residential neighborhood. It's parked in my garage, visible from the street. Only if you're trespassing on my driveway. Then she gave me that smile. You know the one, tight-lipped, like she's fighting the urge to spit on your shoes. We'll see what the board has to say. There is no board, by the way. But Karen didn't let things like facts get in her way. The next few weeks, straight-up psychological warfare. She started photographing my house daily. I caught her once measuring my lawn with a ruler. Another time, she left a typed note demanding I move the Mustang to an approved storage facility or face corrective towing. That's when I installed a security cam over the garage, not just because of Karen, but because the DEA had warned me certain folks might come sniffing around for that car. I wasn't allowed to touch it, but I was told to keep watch. And thank God I did. It was a Tuesday. I'd stepped out for 30 minutes. Just enough time to grab groceries and a cold brew. The second I pulled up, my stomach twisted. Garage door wide open. Lock cut. Chain dangling. Mustang gone. For 5 full seconds, I thought I was losing my mind. I dropped the groceries. Eggs cracked. Coffee hit the driveway. Legs took off before my brain could catch up. The garage was empty. No glass. No damage. Just spotless concrete and dread. Then I heard it. That deep, unmistakable growl of a '67 Mustang coming down the road. And there she was, Karen, behind the wheel, in my car, sitting upright, sunglasses on, her perfectly layered bob catching the breeze. She waved like everything was totally normal, like she hadn't just committed a felony. That smile? Pure smug wrapped in delusion. I was too stunned to say anything. She pulled into her driveway across the street like she'd just come back from a spa weekend. Parked the Mustang. Hopped out. Gave the fender a quick polish. And then, just to really twist the knife, she peeled a sticker off her Lexus and slapped it right onto the Mustang's windshield. It read, "Approved HOA vehicle." I went back inside in silence, breathing heavy, my brain firing off like the 4th of July. I pulled up the security footage on my phone. There she was, middle of the day, bolt cutters in hand, busting the lock, calling a tow truck like it was just another Tuesday. She even left a handwritten note taped inside the garage. "You're welcome. Eyesores aren't allowed here." I didn't call the cops. I called the DEA. The agent on the phone didn't curse out loud, but it was all over his tone. "She what?" I sent over the video, the stills, the timestamp, the note. He told me to stay put. Don't confront her. Someone would be in touch soon. Turns out Karen hadn't just stolen a car. She had messed with a live federal op. That Mustang, not just under surveillance. It was wired, tagged, monitored, still had trace evidence from the last sting it had been used in. And Karen Witherspoon just rolled it into her driveway like she was starring in Fast and Furious. HOA takeover. I stared out the window at that Mustang, heart racing. The car looked smaller now. Or maybe it was just the crushing weight of her stupidity. That's when I spotted it. The hood was popped open. She was poking around, getting ready to flip it. Or worse, maybe she already had. And that's when I knew. This wasn't about my car anymore. This was turning into a federal mess. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was scared of Karen's next move, but because I was terrified of what the DEA might do. They're not known for their patience or their sense of humor, especially when a neighborhood tyrant with a topiary fetish steals their bait car. I sat there in the dark, no lights on, watching her house like some B-list spy. Only I wasn't the agent. I was the fool who let the feds' evidence get swiped by a woman who once fined a kid for shooting hoops in his driveway. Around 6 a.m., a white van crawled down the street. No stop, no rush, just rolled past her place and vanished around the bend. 10 minutes later, another one did the same. No markings, dark windows, not from around here. And I'd know, because Karen always made sure we all knew who belonged. Which meant only one thing. The DEA had arrived. That morning, I got a call from a guy named Langford. Polite, but in that armed and serious kind of way. Calm, direct. He thanked me for helping out, then asked if I could maintain normal behavior for a few days. His words. I said I'd try, but if Karen came after my mailbox or tried to find me for wearing the wrong shade of socks, I wasn't making promises. He chuckled once, then got serious. We need her to feel untouchable. She's already crossed a line. Now we want to see how far she'll go. So that was the play. Let Karen bury herself. And wow, did she grab that shovel. That afternoon, she hosted a surprise HOA meeting in her backyard. This wasn't a legit HOA. More like a live-action roleplay of one. A power trip she kept alive with fear, fake authority, and a handful of bored seniors clinging to some sense of control. I showed up just to play the clueless neighbor. Wore a tacky tourist tee, flip-flops, brought a cooler of sparkling water to pass around. She stared daggers at me the entire time. She kicked things off with, and I quote, "We have successfully removed a neighborhood blight." Her actual words. She even had a slideshow, a PowerPoint, featuring the Mustang, before and after rescue. There was clapping, some nods, a few confused looks from neighbors who hadn't even realized it was missing. Karen soaked it all in like she'd just negotiated world peace. And then came the bombshell. She said she'd found a new owner for the car, that it had already been picked up by a collector who truly values heritage. My jaw locked so hard I thought I cracked a tooth. She sold it. She actually sold a DEA-tagged car. To someone. Some unknown buyer. Maybe out of state. Maybe not even in the country. And she stood there, grinning like the cat that ate the canary. I kept sipping my sparkling water like it was gasoline disguised as tea. I didn't have to say a word. I had my phone and a hidden lav mic tucked inside a pocket in my cooler. Everything she said was getting recorded. The audio was perfect. Her bragging was loud enough to carry across the whole lawn. Langford was going to eat this up. After the meeting, I went home and uploaded the clip to the secure DEA portal they'd given me. 10 minutes later, Langford called. "She's toast," he said. Now it was all about surveillance. Round-the-clock monitoring. Turned out the guy Karen sold the Mustang to was already flagged, suspected of running dirty money through phony classic car sales. That Mustang, loud and illegal as it was, had just become a flashing arrow into their whole scheme. But while the DEA played the long game, I needed something more personal. Karen had gone full nuclear. She crossed property lines, busted locks, stole federal evidence, and now strutted around like queen of the cul-de-sac. So I took the logical step. I launched my own low-key offensive. First, I reported her for unauthorized landscaping. She'd laid down a decorative stone walkway that reached 6 inches past her property line. That's a code issue. City hit her with a warning. She called me out at the next HOA meeting, but I just smiled and said, I thought it looked lovely. Such a shame when people don't appreciate it legally. Next up, noise complaint. Not for a party. Nope. Karen had this old fountain in her front yard that gurgled 24/7 like it was trying to contact Atlantis. The pump? Over the decibel limit for residential areas. Citation. Then came my favorite. Her prized Lexus had aftermarket window tint. Too dark. I filed an anonymous tip. Cops pulled her over right in front of her house. Her face? A mix of shock, fury, and righteous outrage. I watched it all unfold from behind a curtain, sipping coffee like a soap opera villain. Petty? Maybe. Worth it. Every drop. But none of that touched what happened next. 2 nights later, flashing lights outside her home. No sirens. Just pulsing strobes. Unmarked vehicles. Agents in dark jackets. Langford told me they'd act fast if the collector made a move, and he had. They followed the Mustang, watched it change hands, and now they were back, tracing the whole trail. Karen was officially in the DEA's sights. The next morning, radio silence. No gardening. No passive-aggressive broom theatrics. Just stillness. Then, come noon, she strutted out full suburban warrior. Perfect hair, clipboard in hand. Marching door to door to get signatures for a new HOA rule banning suspicious vehicle storage. She was still playing pretend, still acting like the neighborhood answered to her. Then she did the dumbest thing yet. She knocked on my door. You'll be receiving a new fine, she said. We've decided any unapproved repairs visible from the garage are in violation of neighborhood aesthetics. I looked at her, calm, smiling. You mean the garage you broke into? She froze. Excuse me. You left a note. In your handwriting. I still have it. Want a copy? For just a beat, I saw it. That flicker of panic. A chink in the armor. But she snapped right back. I have the full support of the HOA board, she barked. And I have the full support of the federal government. I replied, then slowly shut the door in her face. Behind me, my phone buzzed. Text from Langford. Short. To the point. We've got her. And just when I thought things couldn't spiral further, another message came in. From a neighbor I barely knew. Karen had been skimming HOA funds. For years. And someone had the proof. It all unraveled faster than I could have guessed. 1 minute she was patrolling the block like some suburban Caesar in yoga pants. And the next, her loyal followers were whispering about her like she'd faked her way into sainthood via hedge trimming. The car? Just the spark. The real fire was everything else. Her phony authority, the stolen funds, her obsession with controlling every inch of a place she didn't even legally own. And the whispers? They were turning into action. Tina, the neighbor who messaged me, a retired CPA and professional tea pourer, invited me over for what she called a little chat about the monster across the street. What I got instead was a full forensic audit of Karen's homemade empire. Tina had receipts, emails, HOA, meeting notes, mismatched bank records, and years of shady spending disguised as community beautification projects. Turns out, Karen had been quietly funneling money from the neighborhood dues, technically voluntary, but most paid out of social pressure, into a personal checking account she ran under the name Community Enrichment and Planning Fund. She used it to cover her yard upgrades, a fancy new patio, and even chipped in on her daughter's wedding. The wedding, by the way, had a strict no-jeans policy and a shrimp tower flown in from Miami. I stared at the pile of evidence and asked Tina the only thing that made sense. Why hadn't anyone spoken up before? She took a slow sip of coffee, her face full of that calm, biting honesty. Because she intimidated people. But now she's the one who's scared, and folks can smell it. That afternoon, I handed everything over to Agent Langford. He didn't sound shocked, just worn out, like this kind of mess was his version of a regular Tuesday. He said the paperwork would strengthen their case. The federal charges were already piling up: grand theft, obstruction of an active federal case, illegal sale of seized property. Now, with added counts of fraud and financial abuse, Karen wasn't just staring down cuffs. She was looking at jail jumpsuits and legal bills taller than her stack of HOA newsletters. Still, the feds kept quiet. No dramatic bust. No flashbangs. They waited. Then they struck at the perfect moment. Karen had thrown together a good old-fashioned Americana event on the neighborhood green, a mini festival where she was going to reveal her big contribution to community heritage. She hadn't said what it was, but from the way she kept bragging about vintage restoration and timeless design, I knew. She was bringing out the Mustang. She was going to make it the star of her bogus car show. Parade a piece of stolen government property in front of the whole neighborhood like it was a trophy. I arrived early, lawn chair in hand, sunglasses on, doing my best to keep a poker face. The green was packed. Folding chairs, balloon swords, lemonade stands. Karen climbed onto the little stage they'd rigged up beside the lemonade table, mic in hand, pearls gleaming in the sun. Today, she declared, we honor the spirit of American craftsmanship, the art of restoration, and the pride of a well-tended neighborhood. I almost applauded, because she was delivering the setup to her own downfall like she was accepting an Oscar. Then she waved for the Mustang to come forward. A young guy drove it up, early 20s, clearly had no clue what he was messing with. Karen gave a dramatic flourish. This car was forgotten, damaged, and left to rot. But I saw something in it. And now, with the right buyer and a little love, it's found its place again, with people who know its worth. She turned, locked eyes with me, flashing that same smug grin, the one that always came with a side of superiority. And that's when three men in black suits stepped up onto the stage. Agent Langford stood center, badge out. The crowd froze. Karen blinked. Once. Twice. Then came the annoyance. Then the fear. Langford didn't even need the mic. Karen Witherspoon, you are under federal investigation for the theft and sale of government-seized property, obstruction of a federal investigation, and financial fraud. Please step down. Karen actually laughed. This is insane, she said. I'm the president of this neighborhood. Langford raised an eyebrow. And now, you're about to be a special guest of the state. Two agents moved in. Karen tried to retreat, but the Mustang blocked her. Nowhere left to run. The kid who drove the car looked like he might pass out. One agent guided him away gently, while another opened the door to inspect the car's interior. That's when Karen's face changed. Gone was the pride. Gone was the bravado. All that remained was panic. Pure, raw panic. She started yelling about setups, conspiracies, blaming me, screaming about how the real crime was letting people like him live here, pointing right at me like I'd hexed her roses. As they cuffed her and led her off the stage, still shouting, she cried out, I did this for the neighborhood. For you. You're welcome. No one clapped. A few turned their heads. Someone muttered, well, that explains the shrimp tower. Fallout came fast. Within 2 days, the fake HOA was toast. The whole board stepped down. A new committee took its place. One that was properly registered, transparent, limited in power, and didn't fine folks for tacky wind chimes. Tina was voted in as treasurer. She accepted with a grin sharp enough to split concrete. The Mustang was returned to federal custody, pending investigation. But Langford told me quietly, off the record, that it'd probably be released soon. We don't need it anymore, he said. You helped us get what we really wanted. And besides, it's not like she could sell it again. I spent the evening watching the news. Karen's mugshot was already making the rounds, paired with bold headlines like HOA Queen arrested in DEA sting and local woman sells federal evidence, blames community. Her face, once the icon of control on our street, was now the butt of national jokes. Memes popped up everywhere. People were saying stuff like, she looks like the type to ask for the manager of the FBI. I didn't celebrate. Not out loud. But inside, I was riding a wave of pure schadenfreude strong enough to power a whole town. And just when I thought it was all behind me, when the story felt over, I got a letter. Not an email. Not a knock on the door. A legit, old-school, handwritten letter delivered by certified mail. Return address. A federal detention center. Pink envelope. That handwriting, definitely Karen's. I opened it expecting either an apology or one last rant. What I got instead? A full-on descent into delusion. She said I framed her, claimed I baited her with the car, that I planned it all, knew it'd land her in trouble, and used the law against her. She demanded I help get her out, said we were both victims of a broken system. I read it twice, folded it neatly, tucked it in a drawer, and poured a drink. Because even locked up, Karen still couldn't grasp the truth that kicked all this off. She stole the wrong car, from the wrong place, at the worst possible time. It took about 3 weeks for things to really calm down. The neighborhood felt different, not gloomy, just this weird, post-chaos quiet where everyone's a bit more civil, a bit more reserved, and way less interested in running sketchy HOAs out of garden sheds. Karen's arrest hit the whole street like a shockwave. At first, no one made eye contact. Then, slowly, the smiles came back. People waved again. Dogs weren't barked at through fences. No one obsessively measured lawn edges. The vibe was chill, which is wild, considering we basically just lived through a federal sting disguised as a neighborhood feud. Langford called late one Friday, said the case was officially closed. Charges filed. Plea deals were already in the mix. Karen was looking at multiple felonies, and while they didn't expect much money out of her, it turns out skimming HOA dues doesn't make you rich. They were content with the result. The guy she sold the Mustang to was going to court. As for the car, Langford said the DEA had cleared it. All devices removed. All evidence handled. He paused, then said, "We'd like to return it to you." "A thank you." I nearly dropped the phone. "You're giving it back?" Langford chuckled. "You kept it safe. Until Karen didn't. And you helped us close a case we've been tracking for a while." Paperwork done. Car's clean. 2 days later, a flatbed rolled up my driveway with the Mustang. Still stunning. Cherry red, chrome like glass, black stripes on the hood. They'd even left the federal evidence tag hanging from the mirror, laminated and all. A little keepsake, I guess. The driver handed over the keys and a clipboard. I signed, took the keys, and for the first time in over a year, opened that door without bracing for a takedown. It started right up. The engine growled like it had been waiting for this. I just sat there, letting it rumble through the garage, soaking in that rare feeling when everything finally clicks. That car wasn't just a car anymore. It was a trophy, a moving monument to everything I'd endured and outlasted. A few hours later, like clockwork, neighbors stopped by, not to complain, just to admire. One brought a 6-pack. Another brought cookies. Someone asked if I'd enter it in the local vintage car show. I said I'd think about it, which meant absolutely, and I hoped the judges watched the news. Then, a week later, another letter arrived. Same pink envelope. Same handwriting. Karen again. Only this time, it was typed. 2 pages. Titled, "An Open Letter to My Former Community." It was this bizarre mashup of apology, rant, and martyrdom. She started by vaguely admitting mistakes were made, blamed stress, menopause, and government overreach, then somehow turned it into a full-on attack on half the neighborhood. She claimed her only fault was caring too deeply, and that if folks had simply followed the rules, none of it would have happened. Her last paragraph asked for forgiveness and hinted that she might come back one day, stronger and wiser. I read it 3 times, mostly in disbelief. Then I handed it around the neighborhood like it was some cursed relic from a horror flick. Everyone reacted the same. Awkward chuckles followed by a unanimous, "Nope." Karen wasn't coming back. And if she ever did, the new HOA, fully legal, filed, and wonderfully dull, would make sure she stayed a good 50 feet from the bylaws. Tina was crushing it as treasurer, and Rob, our new president, had already reversed every ridiculous rule Karen had pushed through. Those bogus car fines. Gone. The grass height nonsense. Fixed. The aesthetic standards that magically only applied to 4 houses. Erased. In their place, we had transparency, monthly meetings anyone could join, and a neighborhood group chat that mostly shared pet pics and bake sale reminders. Honestly, it felt almost eerie how normal things had become. Still, I didn't drop my guard entirely. I installed another camera above the garage, this one tucked inside a motion-triggered owl statue, just in case. The Mustang now sat proudly in the driveway, no longer a spark for suburban warfare. One evening, while I was buffing the fender, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw Mrs. Elderly from 2 doors down, the one who used to glare any time I even looked at a leaf blower. She stood still for a second, then said, "You know, I always thought you were the troublemaker." I paused, unsure what to expect next. And then, she smiled. A small one, but real. Now I think you're just the guy who brought peace to the neighborhood with a classic car and a lot of patience. Coming from someone who once reported a garden gnome as visual clutter, that was pretty high praise. After she walked away, I leaned against the car and let everything replay in my head. The chaos, the fines, the break-in, the federal agents. Karen's expression when she realized the Mustang was bait. It all felt like an episode from some Netflix docuseries. Maybe one day it would be. But for now, it was just my life. Calmer, quieter, with way more horsepower. That night, I took the Mustang out for a spin. Just an easy cruise around town. Windows down, radio on. Folks waved. Kids pointed. A couple car guys tossed up the classic two-finger salute. I felt good, free, and maybe just a little bit smug. When I pulled back into the driveway, the headlights caught something on the porch. A package. No return address. Just a small brown-wrapped box. I picked it up, opened it, and found one thing inside. A bolt cutter. The exact kind that had been used on my garage lock. No note. No explanation. I scanned the darkness. No figures. No footsteps. No signs. Could have been a joke. Maybe one last jab from Karen, orchestrated from wherever she ended up. Who knows? I turned it over in my hand, then casually walked over to the trash can and dropped it in. Because that bolt cutter didn't break me. It triggered the dominoes that brought her phony kingdom down. And me? I got my car, my quiet, and my neighborhood back. So here's the final takeaway. You can snap a lock, swipe a car, even fake your way into running a street. But eventually, someone's going to shut you down. And sometimes, all it takes is a camera, a Mustang, and a healthy dose of petty revenge.